What's going on, everyone? And welcome to another episode of Writing Friction. And as always, today's guest is pretty cool. Everyone say hello to Layla AlAmmar. How are you, Layla?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, most definitely. It's an absolute pleasure. Where are we zooming in from?
I'm currently in the northwest of England,
Northwest of England. Okay.
so just outside Manchester.
Most definitely. You're talking to someone who just finished season 4 of The Crown. So I'm all about I'm all into the
Yeah,
UK right now.
it's exactly like that. It's exactly like that. I just sit and have tea and crumpets all day.
It seems to be the case, right? And just drive around in Rolls Royces and Bentleys. Yeah, I mean that show, for people who don't know, I don't know if you've watched it. We don't have to talk about
I
it, but
have.
I mean, I
I
loved it.
have.
I loved it. I
Did
thought
you watch it from the beginning though, or
episode 1, season 1.
all the way through, huh?
I watched it in an entire week, and
Oh,
yeah, and what it did for me, and the reason I thought it really cemented its place in the canon of great television shows, the fact that they were able to switch the entire cast in season 3. No spoiler alerts, but
yeah.
I mean, pretty crazy. But we're not here to talk about The Crown. We're here to talk about you.
No, I mean we could though if you wanted.
I'd be down to start a Crown podcast. That could actually be kind of cool. So let's start from you. While we were talking just a little bit before the podcast, I was incorrect in assuming where you were born. You were born in Texas, but raised in Kuwait, correct?
Yeah. So my mom is from South Texas, and she met my dad when he was there doing his graduate work, and so that's where they were married, and we lived there, I guess, for a couple of years after I was born, and then moved back to Kuwait. But I did all my schooling and all my growing up was done in Kuwait.
And so what was that like? I mean, how old were you when you moved from Texas to Kuwait? I mean, did you have any idea of what was going on in your life at that point?
I was only 2 when we moved back,
Uh,
so I was still a baby, and we went back to Texas every summer to see my mom's family and stuff. But I mean, Kuwait is Kuwait. It's home. So I'm always I don't really know how to answer questions like that, because it's like, how do you talk about the place you grew up? Well, I mean, it was normal. I grew up there.
I mean, yeah, I grew up in northern New Jersey, and I can write a book about growing up there. Yeah, I grew up. I mean, I grew up where they filmed The Sopranos. So, like, growing up, to me, that's kind of, it really shaped who I was, though. I mean, I moved to San Francisco 10 years ago, and I took that Jersey dude all the way from Jersey all the way to California and kind of kept it with me. I mean, growing up where you grew up, I mean, it must be a strong part of your identity. It's obviously something you like to write about, right?
I mean, when you're talking about identity, that can open up a whole can of worms in terms of, what do you mean and what kind of influences, go into shaping your identity. And, the fact that I have an American mother and a Kuwaiti father, it means that identity is kind of a hybrid by default, because I felt at home in the States when we were there over the summer, and I can certainly understand American culture and pop culture references, and this is how I grew up as well. But Kuwait is very different. It's a very conservative society. It's not conservative in the way people think when they think about Middle East conservatism, and they automatically think that means you're super religious and stuff. But there's many different levels to that, I guess you could say, back home. So it's more socially conservative, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
So that does go into who I am as well, to an extent. So
Sure.
there is that kind of, you think about America and you think about the freedom eagle, and it's very much the opposite of that, where it's much more conservative, and you kind of hold things in more, I guess.
Mm-hmm. I've been to the Middle East myself. I've been to, I mean, Israel. I'm Jewish. I went to
Mm.
Israel. I popped into Jordan and I popped into Syria, but this was back in 2011, maybe
Ooh,
right before the
right
Arab
before things
Spring.
change.
right before the Arab
Yeah,
Spring.
right before things kicked off.
Later, I mean, I was there probably 6 months before.
Yee.
But but me as a kid, I grew up, lower middle class. The idea of hopping on a plane to Tel Aviv was never even a fucking dream of mine until I was able to move to California, and that's when I kind of started my travels. But you said you grew up, you were always going back and forth back to the States, also, right?
Well, we went during summer vacation, so that was a good 3 months where we were with my mom's family
Uh,
in the States. Yeah, and then obviously during the war, Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1990, and we ended up spending a year in Texas. But I've never actually lived in the States as an adult. I've
mhm.
done all my graduate work in the UK.
Okay. So if we can go back to that, then when did you really start writing? I mean, were you a kid when you started doing it? I mean, was it something that kind of came to you later in life?
Oh yeah. No, no, it was definitely I was a kid writing very bad poems about like foxes that live in boxes and frogs jumping over logs. Like that was me. I remember actually like a little flip book I did when I was like 6 or 7 about, like bath time, and the bathtub was like some magical portal taking
Sure.
you somewhere else. So yeah, I mean it's I've been a reader ever since I can remember. And when you're a big reader, it just kind of naturally lends itself to writing at some point.
Hmm.
So I definitely have been writing for a really, really long time. I viewed it more as a hobby when I was growing up rather than something that I could pursue in a serious way. I think it was only until I was about, because we didn't really have bookstores and book clubs in Kuwait when I was growing up. That wasn't really a thing. I think we had like one bookstore in the entire country.
I mean, how are you
So it
getting your
wasn't until I
books?
was a teenager, I would say, that I started to think, oh, um, well, on summer vacation when I would come to the States, I would do the bulk of my shopping there.
Hmm.
I would just come back with like suitcases full of books.
Sure.
Um, and then online, obviously, when that became available.
Hmm. And so what are you, when you started taking it a little bit more seriously, what were you writing then? Were you doing short stories? Were you kind of looking towards more long form fiction?
I was doing a lot of short stories when I was a teenager, and obviously writing very bad poetry because I think all teenagers have to go through that phase.
I skipped that phase, but
Um,
I came to writing at
uh,
30, so I started
did
writing bad
you?
poetry now.
No, it's like a rite of passage. We all have to go through it. Um, but yeah, I would say like in my early 20s, I started experimenting with doing a longer form. Uh, like I have like loads of half finished novels from that time. And then I decided to go get a master's in creative writing. And my first novel grew out of a short story I did for that program.
Hmm. And when you're doing, before you entered that program, was the grand idea to become a writer? Were you kind of tinkering with other things? Did you have other hobbies you were also doing?
No, the main hobby was always writing.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I think if you talk to anyone and you ask them to say one thing about Layla, they would say she's a writer.
Uh-huh.
That's kind of all I was ever really, really great at in terms of creative endeavors. So
Hmm.
yeah, it was always about writing more than anything.
Yeah.
And I
Eh,
always had this idea of I want it to be on a bookstore somewhere,
yeah, I mean,
in a bookstore rather.
yeah, you could probably see the guitar behind my head. I mean, I've been playing guitar since I was, 10 years old, but I've been reading that whole time, and I kind of came to writing the same way I came to playing music, was just, if someone else could do it, I could do it too. Um, we've talked to a couple of different
Yeah.
authors who have gone to programs and who haven't gone to programs. We've heard different variations of their, you know, thoughts on it. Do you think it helped you to become a better writer? Do you think it was something you needed to do in order to become the writer you are today?
I mean, I think for me, yes, it was definitely helpful because, in Kuwait, I didn't come from, we don't really have this kind of institutionalized, developed system of, writing as something you can teach,
Hmm.
so we didn't have, writing courses in college or creative writing courses that you could take outside of a collegial environment. We didn't have writing groups, just like,
Hmm.
circles that you could join for feedback. There is that now, but when I was coming up, there was nothing like that. So I really felt like I needed a master's program to kind of get into a structure and a discipline, to get feedback from other writers. I felt like I really needed that boost, you
Mhm.
know. So for me, it was incredibly beneficial.
Were
But
people encouraging you early on? Was your family super encouraging of your writing?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. They've always been very, very encouraging and saying, like, go for it. And you say I want to quit my job to go get a master's in creative writing. People kind of look at you like, what's the matter with you? You're not right in the head. But my
Mhm.
parents were like, go for it, do it. Why not?
I quit a corporate finance job to join a band at the age of 23. So,
That's what I did, except for writing.
yeah, it's interesting. I mean,
I was in finance for like 5 years.
man, I mean, I don't
It's
want to.
it's soul
Yeah,
destroying. It's soul
I
destroying, is what it
was.
is.
I have you been to New York City?
Yeah, yeah,
I if you
multiple times.
if you drive over the George Washington Bridge, the town you enter is Fort Lee, New Jersey, and I worked at a
Yeah.
building right at the entrance of the GW Bridge for
Uh,
3 years, and I was just, yeah, that's a whole nother fucking podcast. Don't worry about that. But it's interesting. I asked that because some people, some people have a lot of encouragement. Some people have absolutely no encouragement from anyone. Um,
yeah.
some authors, I won't name any, but it was a real struggle for them in the beginning
Mm.
because they had no one in their lives being like, oh, you should
Yeah,
do
go for
this.
it.
You go ahead and,
Yeah.
but that's great that you have parents that were super into it. I mean, were your parents big readers, or was just they were just happy that you were happy?
My mom is a huge reader, so I definitely got my reading from her.
Yeah.
And a lot of my tastes early on when I was a kid were influenced by her. My dad is not really a reader,
Mhm.
but he was always very supportive of what I wanted to do. And I think you do need that because it is tough and there's a lot of rejection involved in writing. So it's nice to be able to have someone at your back saying, they say they don't like it, but I do. you
Sure,
know
yeah. I got a rejection yesterday for a short story, so I'm well aware of the rejections. That's a running theme.
I
Actually,
got one last week. It happened.
there it is. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, we had Janet Fitch on. I don't know if you know Janet Fitch. And
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
yeah,
White oleander.
exactly. And we were saying we were having a great discussion about rejections. And I wrote a novella. It came out in February of last year, and
Mm,
it got rejected 73 times. And what
wow.
Janet Fitch was saying that she has received so many rejections before White Oleander that she was able to wallpaper an entire wall of her
Plaster
apartment.
her wall. Well,
Uh,
that's back when rejections were actually like on paper,
yeah,
right?
yeah, no, totally. So, well, if we're talking about that, let's just go down that rabbit hole. How did you first deal with those rejections? I mean, was that a demoralizing thing? Did you think what you were writing was the greatest thing ever?
Well, I mean, let me ask you, do you think the rejection is more demoralizing than crickets? Because I got just like crickets for so long, where there was just no response,
I'm
not a
happy.
yes or a no.
Yeah, I'm happy you asked that question. It's interesting. Again, my experience has been you're querying the agent, but most of the times you're querying the agent's assistant. Um, and it kind of has to
Right.
get through that first level. And my thing is, yeah, I rather get the rejection than crickets.
Yeah.
Um, to me,
Yeah.
yeah, because
I
to
got a
me,
lot of crickets.
yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, you're coming at it from a different angle than I am. I'm an outsider, right? I didn't go to any MFA program. I toured in bands for 15 years. So I'm coming at it from a
Okay.
totally different angle. And for me, when I got the rejections, I was stoked because to me it meant
Right.
I pierced the armor. Like I got
Yeah.
through to whatever, gatekeeper there
You
might
were you were worthy you were worthy of a response.
something. And I'm also not,
Yeah.
and I also came prepared, right? I gave them a fully edited manuscript. I wasn't, I gave them a query, the whole
Yeah.
thing. But again, I had to teach myself how to do all that. Did you have people
Mm-mm-mm.
helping you out with that stuff when you were
No,
querying?
no, 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 no. The master's program is definitely deficient, or my master program was in that regard. We weren't given those kinds of practical skills in terms
Hmm.
of querying and writing a synopsis and who to pitch and
Yeah.
God synopsis. I mean, is there a worse exercise in the world?
You have to, yeah,
It's awful.
you have to take your entire novel that you spent years writing and try to
Yeah.
describe it in a paragraph.
Yeah, it's like, sure, I'll take these 80,000 words and give it to you in 700 words. That's totally easy.
Crazy. It's crazy.
Uh,
But it seems
Yeah.
like, I mean, you're just talking to you for 20 minutes. It seems like you're a pretty optimistic person. So, I mean, when you did, how was that process when you first started doing it? When was that novel finished? When did you feel comfortable with it?
Well, I mean, it depends on which one we're talking about.
Well,
Are
you
we
said
talking about the first
your
novel?
first
Because that's
novel.
yeah, yeah. So um, let's see. How can I put this? I finished that one, or the first draft of it rather, in 2015, and that's when I started querying it.
Uh,
I didn't actually sign with an agent until 2 years later. Two
okay.
years and countless queries later. Um, and then after that, things happened pretty quickly. So after I signed with her, HarperCollins in the UK bought the book like by that summer. So within like 4 months of her subbing it, they bought it.
hmm
So
So,
it was like nothing happened for a long time, and then things quickly happened.
let me ask you this. So, for those first 2 years, what made you not want to give up on the project?
It was a combination of things because I definitely put it down sometimes. So like I would go through a burst of querying for maybe 3 or 4 months, and then would get crickets or maybe the odd rejection, and then I would get deflated for
Huh?
2 or 3 months, and then I would get hyped up again and start querying another time. But I had pretty much put that novel away after 2 years and was working on other things because I had in those 2 years, I had edited it and gotten some feedback on it from people and
Mhm.
redrafted and what you have to do. But I had started getting to the point where maybe I should just move on and start querying a different project. And then Trump got elected,
Mhm.
and and uh, and that's when I put out another um, set of pitches. Because a bunch of lit agents were doing an open call for Muslim voices. Um, and so I figured, you know what, I'll try one more time and send it out, and that's
Uh,
when it happened.
so when you're getting those rejections, you're getting those crickets. You said you were also working on some other things as well. Are you the kind of
Mm.
writer? Do you only work on one project at a time, or can you do multiple things?
If it's a novel, I tend to be absorbed in the novel. But
Hmm.
if the first draft of the novel is done and I'm just editing it and fiddling around with it, then I can move on to other things.
Uh,
But other than that, I might play around with some short stories or things of that nature. But I don't work on two long projects at the same time in
are
terms
you
of
a big
drafting.
are you a big editor or a big drafter?
No, I'm definitely an editor.
Okay, so
Yeah.
so you do one draft and then that's the draft, and you're working with just in that.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, that draft can change, but I feel like once the draft is done, that means I've kind of told the story to myself and I know what's happening.
Hmm.
And then, during the editing process, it might be fixing that, but it also might be embellishing in it, embellishing on it and growing it and taking it, in different directions. But it's sort of like you've laid down the bones, like
Of
the bones of
course.
the story are there and it's done.
Yeah. We on the podcast we refer to it as word vomit in the sense that you know what I'm saying? Like just get the words onto the page.
Yeah,
Make
yeah.
sure
I'm
it's.
definitely I'm definitely not a perfection seeker in when I'm drafting. When I'm
Mhm.
drafting, it's just like I need to get the words down. I need to get this out of me onto a
Exactly.
page. I need to tell myself the story, what's happening. And the editing is where, the real hell begins, is during the editing phase.
If you can see this face, you're looking at someone who's been editing their first novel for 2.5 years. So I am at the very, 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 very end of it.
Yeah,
So now I'm a
yeah.
little happier. But man, it's the draft thing it's weird, right? I do one draft and then I do draft 1.1 and then I do two and then
Oh
2.
man.
We've had authors, Elliot Ackerman was on. He retypes every single draft.
No, that's that sounds bad for your health.
And that's what and it's interesting. I kind of found my little routine. I need to wake up, or whenever I'm going to start writing, I'll read 3 pages of what I worked on the day previous to kind of get me back
Yeah,
into it. But yeah, no,
yeah.
my man Elliot, he every day he literally
Wow.
takes.
That's
He's an ex-marine.
insane.
He's an intense dude.
Very disciplined.
Very disciplined. Yeah. Well, speaking of discipline, I'm pretty disciplined. Are you a fairly disciplined author, writer?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Do you
Fairly,
write?
fairly disciplined. A lot more. Sorry.
Do you write at most like the same time every day, or do you have a routine like that?
Yeah. My routine was a lot more rigid before I started my PhD program. I'm
Uh-huh.
about 2 years into a PhD right now, so that's kind of sucking up a lot of my mental energy, and my
Sure.
routine has gotten disrupted. But yeah, it used to be that, I would get up in the mornings, especially on the weekends, and I would, be at the coffee shop by 7 in the morning, and I'd write until 1 or 2, like
Yeah.
nonstop. And that was the routine.
Uh-huh. It what we're talking about this before, and you mentioned it before. You also have to be a good reader to be a good writer.
Yeah,
With all that stuff
absolutely.
going on, I mean, are you even finding the time to read at this point?
Yeah, I mean that's where the bulk of my time is going, to be honest, is
Oh,
with
really?
reading.
Okay.
Yeah, it's more reading than writing at this point.
Yeah, that's an interesting. I mean, do you ever grapple with that? I mean, if you're deep into a project, will you put your reading for pleasure on hold?
Yeah, for sure.
Uh huh.
But I mean, writing a first draft for me tends to happen in a very quick spurt of energy.
Yeah.
So my first novel, the first draft was done in 7 months.
Okay.
This novel, Silence is a Sense, the first draft was done in 4 months.
Okay.
And so during those 4 months, I maybe read 1 or 2 novels, just for me.
Uh huh.
Because I get so consumed with what I'm doing that I don't want anything else. I don't want any other influences around me.
That's what I was gonna ask.
Yeah.
Do
But
you
then
feel like?
during the editing process, it's not a big deal. During the editing, I'll just start reading again.
Well, do you feel like if you're in the process of writing that first draft and you might be reading something else, do you feel like that reading will influence your writing?
Not in a direct way, but to be honest, I might feel inadequate in my
Sure.
writing. You
Sure.
know what I mean? Because I'll be and people, like, sometimes I talk to readers and they don't really kind of understand that, it takes a lot of hard fucking work to get that novel that you actually pick up in a bookstore.
A
Like
lot.
when you buy my book or whatever, this is like the 12th or 13th draft of this thing. Like, a lot of work has gone into it. And
Mhm.
when you're in the weeds drafting, and you read something that is like really meticulously plotted and elegantly drafted and put together, you're just like, oh, why am I even bothering? Like why bother? I'm not, like, this is, what am I doing? So
It's like I'm sure there's a medical term for it. I need to Google it. But it's like if you ever say a word, like the word fork, and you say it
yeah,
over, and then all of a sudden it literally loses its meaning.
yeah,
I'll
yeah,
be like that in when I'm editing. I'll read a paragraph for 30 minutes, then I'll step back. I'm like, what the fuck am I even doing? Like, I don't even,
yeah.
like, the commas don't even make sense after a while. Um,
Yeah.
but again, I had to teach myself the discipline of, like, all right, step back,
Hmm.
take a walk, do something
Yeah.
else. Because with writing, it's not an immediate thing. There's no immediate gratification for me as a writer. It's more about, like, as a musician, if I play something on my guitar, I can get an automatic
Hmm.
response, right? From a listener or from whoever's in the room.
Yeah.
But yeah, with writing, I mean, it's not necessarily doubt, but yeah, I mean, I'm the same way. If I'm writing and I'm reading Cormac McCarthy at the same time, what's the point?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. It
you
can,
know,
it can it can
why
be
would
very demoralizing.
why would anyone want to read my book over the road? You know what I'm saying? So yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. So when that first book came out, what was your life like then? Were you in school? Were you busy? Were you kind of thrown into a different occupation of sorts?
Um, I I was just about, no, I was finishing up my job. I was teaching at a private college in Kuwait. Um, and my book came out in the spring of 2019, and then in the fall I was starting my PhD program. So I was
Yeah.
kind of in this transition period of leaving work and starting the PhD.
Uh-huh. And then, I
Yeah,
mean, the world shut down.
basically.
Yeah. I mean, we had some authors. I'm gonna call you a pre-COVID author because your book came out before the pandemic. My book came out the week of the pandemic. And we've
Jesus.
had some authors come on, and it's interesting. The authors who have come on now with the new books coming out right now.
Yeah.
How I applaud them. I don't want to name any names, but people can listen back to the episodes. But some people are doing some really interesting things in order to
Mhm.
promote their books right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, everything is virtual and it's just such a weird environment to be in,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah,
Um,
I'm really interested when I can start doing the podcast in person. Because I've done
yeah,
50 of these already, and I haven't met
yeah.
any of my guests in person. It's
I
gonna
mean,
be
yeah, it's hard. It's hard, and especially if you're a debut writer, like at least with my debut, I got to have like the big thing. I went to
yeah,
London. We had a big
yeah.
launch for it, and so much of these launch events, it's not just about the event itself. It's about talking to people,
Hmm.
people coming up to you afterwards and asking you about the book, wanting you to sign the book,
Yeah.
networking with other people, other writers. It's about so much more than the event, and I feel like that is not translating well in these COVID events that we've been having now. It's just
Hmm.
not the same vibe.
Yeah, yeah, no. And again, I'm new to the book world, and from an outsider's point of view, the book world can be a little not standoffish, but a little stuck up, and and people are into their own vibes, and it's all good. Um, my goal with the podcast is to kind of come in like a bull into a china store. You know what I mean? Like, here's this
Yeah.
obnoxious Jewish guy from New Jersey, but he likes to read and write. And it's interesting getting these authors to open up. Some of these people, I feel like I've asked some of these questions, and they've never been asked these questions before. Uh,
Oh, yeah.
because I feel
Well,
like
maybe that's because you're not coming from the bookish environment. So you're
that's
not
what it
asking the
is.
questions that we're
Hmm.
used to getting.
Yeah, yeah. I'm really coming as a fan. At the
Yeah.
end of the day, even if I become the next Stephen King, I'll always feel like a fraud. It really makes no difference. So that first book came out. Did that really give you the confidence to kind of just get that second book going? I mean, were you like, I already got this shit down? I mean, well,
Well, you know what? You should write your second book before the first book even comes out, which is exactly what I did, and my editor was so happy about that.
great advice. That's great advice.
Yeah. I mean, I finished Silence of the Sense in 2017, so that was two
Wow.
years before my first book came out.
Uh
Yeah.
huh. What
So
what
it
was
was
that
already
like sitting
done,
on
and they
that?
had bought it before it even came out.
What was that like sitting on that for a couple of years?
It was tough. It was tough because you're talking about, like, I was talking about the pact we made, which I had written in 2015. So it was like 4 years old in my head, and I
Yeah.
was hyped up about Silence because that's what I was working on, and that was like in my head.
Hmm.
But then I had to kind of revisit who I was as a writer back then and what I was thinking about, and you know, it's like revisiting different versions of yourself in a
Sure.
way.
Yeah. It's fascinating how you can spend years working on a project. It comes out, a years goes by, and you can't even remember the first name of the protagonist.
Oh yeah, that
Yeah.
does happen, and it's embarrassing. Or like certain biographical details that someone will mention, and I'm like, wait, what? Didn't I
Yeah.
cut that out? I thought
Yeah.
I cut that out in like my 11th go round or something.
And that's the thing. I feel like authors, when they're forced to talk about their works from 10, 15, 20 years ago, it must
Yeah,
be so difficult because if you ask the Rolling Stones about, Exile on Main Street, there's so much history behind, photos, and the history speaks
yeah,
for itself. Um,
yeah.
yeah, but with
And it
authors, they
kind of
kind of
takes on its own life, kind of separate to you as well.
it really does, we're talking right now. Even Shuggy Bane, that book is very popular. I haven't got
Hmm.
it. I don't know if you read it, but I
I
mean,
haven't read it. No.
yeah, yeah, I mean, it seems to be like it's how some of these books just infiltrate popular culture, and they really just split it wide open. Um,
Mm,
and that's what I love about books. That's really what draws me to it is just how influential some things really can be. Um,
mm,
so when that second book, the new book is called, you said Silence is a Sense, right?
yeah.
And is that out yet, or is it coming out soon?
It comes out March 16th.
Hmm.
So in this
And
thing.
yeah, so what are your plans to help promote that? I mean, who knows what? Are you guys still on lockdown in the UK?
We are, yeah, yeah. It seems like an indefinite lockdown over here.
Yeah, I think we got news in California. They're gonna lift it here, I think this week. Um, again.
Oh, you guys have been in lockdown
Oh
in
God.
in San Francisco, I mean?
Yeah, California got whooped. Again,
I've heard the news, but I didn't know that you guys actually locked down. I thought it was just more like, it's fine.
yeah, no, I'm not a political person.
Yeah.
So I won't speak politics, but all I know is my ignorance tells me the governor has opened the door. He's like, do it
Mm,
now. So that's what's
mm-hmm.
happening. Again, I'm not a political person. But people forget that it's called the United States.
Right.
of America.
Yeah.
And that's one of the great things of America.
Uh-huh.
Um, and sometimes it might also be one of the bad things about America. That's another
Sure.
podcast. But yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
right now it's just state to state. You can go to Alabama, Florida, and go to a football
Mhm.
game with 50,000 people.
Yeah. Yeah, something similar to that was happening over here in the UK where, Scotland and England and Wales couldn't really get, on the same page in terms of how they were responding to it. And
Yeah,
so, at one point, like Scotland shut the borders with England and said, you can't come in. And then parts of England were like, oh, you can't come over here. And it all just sort of fragmented rather than having a unified approach to
it's
thing,
insane. I mean, I don't know if you know who Lawrence Wright is. He's an author.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And his
I've read
his
I've read his stuff.
well, if you're a fan, you need to read The End of October.
Yeah, yeah. Isn't that the one where he predicts the plague?
He literally
Basically
wrote
the
about what is
the
going
virus.
on right now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know it's a bit scary.
I mean, but the research he did, I mean, the
Yeah, yeah,
detail, I mean, he nailed it.
yeah.
Unbelievable. I'm getting goosebumps just talking about it.
Mm-mm.
It's
Yeah.
unbelievable. Okay, so let's get back to our world.
Mhm.
So the new book
Mhm.
comes out in March. What are your plans going forward? I mean, do you have the third book already finished?
Oh God, no. You sound like my editors now. Don't ask me that. It's a dreaded question.
Mhm.
I'm in the middle of a PhD, so all of my writing energy has been directed towards getting my dissertation done.
Of course.
I'm playing around with a couple of ideas for the next novel, but I haven't really settled on anything that I'm like full steam ahead with. I'm just like
Yeah.
tinkering around with a few stuff.
I mean, are you still trying to get at a keyboard every day, even just to get a couple of minutes in, or is it you're really
Oh
just,
yeah.
uh-huh.
Yeah, especially on the weekends. I try to detach from my PhD work on the weekends and work on some other things.
Yeah.
So whether it's a short story or tinkering around, like I said, but it's hard when what you're doing through the week demands so much of your writing energy and your mental capacity to write,
Yeah.
versus doing a 9 to 5 job that doesn't require that part of your brain.
Sure.
But like writing a PhD requires too much of my
Mhm.
writing brain. You
Yeah,
know what I
no,
mean?
totally. You're speaking of that for people who don't see the podcast. I'm wearing. I own this rough paws. I own the dog walking business, and
Oh,
this allows me to write in the morning and write at night,
yeah,
and at the same time, I was very well aware of this. I'm not exhausting myself mentally. Physically, I'm
yeah,
exhausting myself, but
yeah.
I mean, I'm in the woods all day. I'm writing in the woods.
Yeah, yeah, no, right. Walking is definitely really good for kind of getting the writing juices flowing. It's
Oh
it's
yeah.
when you need to use that part of your brain to write something. Like
Mhm.
when I was in finance, I was doing economic and market research reports. Like that was my job. I was a research analyst. So literally my entire work day was reading and writing. And it's like I can't go home and apply that same amount of energy to writing
Yeah.
a novel. I just can't.
And when you're
So
not
that's
getting
why I would
paid
all
for it.
exactly, yeah. Well, nobody ever gets paid unless you're like Stephen King or something, but
Yeah, yeah. We've talked about that on the podcast too.
yeah.
Again, I'm all new to it. The publishing world seems to run fairly parallel to the record business.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the sense of, well, not necessarily economically, but in the sense of, there's agents,
Hmm.
record labels, the publisher. They're the ones
Yeah.
who puts out the physical product. They're the ones who are
Mhm.
pushing it. They're the ones who are
Sure.
investing in it. And
Yeah.
well, that's what my novels. I'm writing about a fictional rock and roll band, so I'm deep in this world right now, and
Have you read David Mitchell's new one, Utopia Avenue?
it's sitting on my where it's right there. Yeah.
It's so good.
I I I picked it up because I almost had a heart attack. I've spent 3 years writing this book about a band, thinking to myself, well, no one's
Yeah.
really written any good books about bands. And then as soon as I hit up my editor, she's like, have you read Utopia Avenue? And I'm like, what the hell is that?
It's so good.
Picked up my book. It takes place in a different place, different time, different everything. Thank
Good.
God.
Good, 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 good.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that one's I his writing's a little difficult for me to get into.
Mm,
It's pretty, just he's a British writer. He's very,
yeah.
you know, but
Yeah.
I was
He's
I
one of my
picked
faves.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, he's a great writer.
Yeah,
But I was going into it making sure I'm like, okay, this is how he writes about gear. This is how he writes about the shows. This is how he
sure.
writes about groupies. I got
Yeah,
it to make sure I wasn't ripping him off without
right.
knowing it.
Yeah. No, I mean,
Um,
I'm sure there's any number of directions that you could take it. And I always think that it's really cool to write about music, but it's also really difficult, to try and capture the way music makes you feel in prose.
yeah, yeah. Again, I don't know if David Mitchell's ever been in a band. I mean, I've been
Probably
in.
not, but who knows?
Yeah, I mean, I lived in a van for 10 years.
Yeah.
So I'm writing about, I mean, this book isn't for everyone in the sense that, you need to know like what a Marshall amplifier is. Things like I'm getting
Mm.
very detailed, which hopefully will kind of, but this isn't about me. Don't worry about it. So Layla, this has been an absolute pleasure. I always kind of end these podcasts asking two specific questions. One, are you a social media person? Are you on Twitter, Instagram, anything like that?
I am, yeah, by force rather than by desire most of the time. But
Okay, well, that's two questions. One, what is your handle? So if you want people to follow you.
yeah, on Twitter it's Layla_AlAmmar. So my first name underscore last name. And then it's the same on Instagram, but add author at the end of my last name.
Awesome. And then the part two of that is, do you find, you said kind of by force, I'm
Mm,
not good at Twitter, I'm good at Instagram. Do you
mm.
find you have maybe different personalities or different ways of approaching social media?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not so much on Instagram. I tend to be on Twitter more,
Uh,
even though Twitter is like a toxic hellscape of the worst of humanity, but like we're all on there together, so I guess it's fine.
like the
But
Titanic, we're all going down, baby.
yeah, we're all going down, so we might as well have some memes while we do it.
Crazy.
But yeah, I mean, I'm usually on Twitter mainly to uh, talk about stuff that concerns my writing or concerns my PhD. And there's a
Yeah.
lot of overlap between the two because my PhD is about Arab women's fiction and I'm an Arab woman writing fiction. So there tends
Oh,
to be a lot to talk about.
I'm into it.
Yeah.
And then the last question I always ask, where are people buying your books from? What bookstores do you like to rep?
Oh, wow. I mean, always go for indie, I think. Go for your local stores. Um, I mean, I wouldn't know anywhere in the States because I've never, it's been so long since I've been there. It's been at least over 10 years since I've been to the States, I
Oh
think.
wow, wow. Okay, okay. So you
Yeah.
haven't even been here during you weren't here during the Trump era.
Oh God, no. Why
Crazy.
would I? No.
Yeah, well, that's a separate question, but it's just that time frame happens to overlap with the Trump era. Crazy, 10 years.
Yeah.
Okay, wow, yeah, yeah. Do you have any plans to come back to the States?
I mean, I always say I do, but I tend to find myself more like I feel more at home in Europe
Uh,
and in the UK, to be
uh,
frank. I mean, my family is from South Texas, so like I think that's all I need to say in conjunction with the Trump era.
a
So
lot.
there's not a lot. Yeah, there's not a lot that's kind of copacetic in that regard. So even like 10 years ago when I was in the States, it was always on the East Coast. So I was in New York or DC, sometimes Boston.
Have
I've
you
been
ever
to
been to
San
San
Francisco a
Francisco?
few times. Yeah, I've been to San Francisco a few times. I did a summer course at Berkeley
Oh, okay,
uh,
great. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
back in 2003, 2004, something like
yeah,
that. Loved it. It's such
yeah.
a great city, so beautiful.
Yeah, I mean the Bay Area is I mean, again, I'm from northern New Jersey, so the Bay Area is
I've never
paradise.
actually been to Jersey.
You're not missing much. Don't worry. If I will say this, and I will get back. I will get support. New Jersey, northern New Jersey, has better pizza and bagels than all of New York City. I'm just gonna say it like
Really?
it is.
Wow.
It's what
I
it
mean, that's, that's
is.
that's quite a statement.
It's what it is. I was born in Queens. My parents are from the Bronx. I went to school in Manhattan. North Jersey
Yeah.
has the best Italian food and pizza. Layla, this has been an
Yeah.
absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for
Thank
taking
you
the
for
time.
having me. This was
Oh yeah,
fun.
yeah. This is a blast, and I'm sure we'll catch up on social media and all that stuff, and we'll post all
Yeah.
the links. And yeah, and best of luck to everything in the future.
Loving it. You too.
Most
Good luck with
definitely.
your book.
Thank you so much, and maybe you'll be talking about it one day.
Yeah, we'll do like a reverse interview.
There it is, Layla. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Michael. I appreciate it.
Bye bye.
Bye.